Welcome to Twitch and YouTube and TikTok and Discord. I hope everybody is doing well. Have you all had water, taken your meds, eaten something, and said something kind about yourself? Because everybody deserves kindness, including you. And remember that it is Easter weekend. And here in South Africa, we get the Friday and the Monday off, so it is a long weekend for us. Tomorrow, I am playing D&D with a couple of friends, a couple of newbies are joining us, and they're learning how to play. So they're joining my friend Ross's table for the first time. And Ross is our forever DM locally, and I think he misses actually being like a player, playing characters and stuff, but I think he really likes being a DM. And yes, he does complain about being forever DM, but every now and then you see the sparkle in his eyes at everything that he's created. He's one of those people who's got idea upon idea for every fantasy novel under the sun that he wants to write, and he never actually writes them, and then eventually he just writes them as campaigns. So yeah, he is forever DM for a reason. And so what are you guys doing for Jesus's party weekend? I know a friend in Bangalore, as it's called, says that there is a shot, an alcoholic shot, called the Jesus Christ in Bangalore, because you take a shot of this and you wake up 3 days later. And I said, one Easter I need to spend it in Bangalore and have the shot called the Jesus Christ. But I think it would be a waste of a good weekend. Eating M&Ms because he can't. Jeez, Sean. Yeah. Wow. Ugh. This is the shitty thing about being on an app that is now taken over by people who are a little bit too close to Christian fundamentalists for comfort, is that those of us who are too close to Satan for comfort have to be careful what we say. But yeah, Jesus's Easter weekend plans: getting hammered, getting nailed, hanging out. And I need to change the thing of the... I didn't change the topic of the stream again, because I'm a silly goose and I just forget. Okay, so we are not reading Orientalism, as it says on Twitch and YouTube. Hi, Alex. We are reading Abolition, Feminism Now by Angela Davis, Gina Dent, Erica Mayners, and Beth Richie. Hello? Yes, okay. I was wondering, like, what in the glitch? There was a little bit of a glitch. I am a silly goose, yes. And peace was never an option when it comes to silly geese. All right, so last week we spoke about the, under the tag of feminism, we're speaking about all of these organizations adjacent to Insight that opposed the prison industrial complex through feminist organizing. And something that really made me think here is the line gender violence as a pathway to women's imprisonment. And this is something that I had to discuss with, one, my therapist, and two, um, my best friend. And I was having a really tough time with coming to terms with my alters and with having DID for a very, very long time. And every now and then that feeling returns. It returns in a big way. It returns in a way that makes me feel like I'm the worst person on earth. And that I should just take myself out of the entire equation, and all of the people who are impacted by my mental illness would be better off, which I know is not the case logically. And logically, I understand that this is this is capitalism, this is patriarchy, this is white supremacy, and all of these systems talking. But the concept of, hey, Gen X, the concept of DID is foreign to a lot of people. They don't want to understand. They sometimes, as we have seen people on this app do to me and other creators, weaponizing DID to mistreat people and to undermine the things that we say and the things that we do, and all of those things. And so also related to it, dealing with the possibility of an alter doing something either A, immoral, or B, illegal. And what do I do in that case? If an alter does something, what do I do? Because it's still my body being used as a conduit for that immoral or illegal thing. And so it is still, under the law, me. Do I get institutionalized because an alter is doing something that should not be done? Or do I get thrown in prison? What do I do as Nikita Ramkissoon, as a person who has no inkling of what was done? What happens then? My DID was caused by a man choosing by himself to be sexually abusive to a child. So, gender violence is indeed a pathway to women and femmes imprisonment, even if it is not our doing. We bear the price of, we are always suffering the consequences of gender violence. And gender-based violence in this context, in the context of carcerality, is one of the most dangerous things for women and femmes. So we start on page 105 today, carceral cooperation and carceral feminism. Despite years of relentless work, by the 1900s, the gulf between abolitionist perspectives and gender work was widening, and many survivors were falling into the dangerous space between the two movements. The language and analysis of radical activists was also being co-opted and absorbed by mainstream organizing, as legal and legislative changes advanced local pro-arrest policies and mandatory police responses. This is especially in the US. Distracted by a false sense of success and the perception of mainstream political support, mainstream anti-violence organizations were increasingly supported by state resources, focused on data collection and service delivery models, organized and professionalized according to hierarchies dominated by white people and whiteness. And that's important, because how does an organization that is focused on the white community serve a BIPOC community when they don't know that racism is one of the biggest problems when it comes to gendered violence, when it comes to carceral systems? And I posited to a friend of mine a couple of months ago that the steadfast faith in the carceral system by white people is hinged on the fact that blackness and brownness is criminalized. Crisis services begin to monitor other neoliberal intervention programs populating the landscape of a growing social service industry. And now it is important to look at it as an industry, because when you look at public service as an industry, you see how it firstly becomes increasingly privatized, or employs increasingly privatized service providers, and B, how it is co-opted into the system of carcerality, not just carcerality, but working for the state rather than working for the people. Because when you have state funding and you are at risk of losing that state funding depending on who you're helping and how you're helping them, it becomes an absolute shit show, because you have to bend to the will of the people who are funding your pocket. Beth, Richie, and Kyla Martinson later described the way in which services become safety. The emphasis of these programs was on individual care rather than root causes of violence, reforming systems rather than creating alternatives, and providing short-term respite for people who have been harmed rather than producing long-term structural changes. And of course, a system that is co-opted, an organization that is co-opted into the system will never try to create long-lasting change, because the powers that be want to maintain the status quo. So yes, it's an individual problem. Yes, teenage pregnancy is such a huge problem. It's such a huge problem. I'm so sorry, darling. We can help you get all the resources that you need, but we're not going to educate you for free. Nor are we going to address the problem that it was a 46-year-old man who got you pregnant. Was it rape? Was it not rape? Are you keeping the baby? But no, this is a state that in which you can't have an abortion. All of those questions are completely ignored. The cluster of organizations, from mainstream anti-violence organizations to charities that provide access to food or housing, are now increasingly referred to as part of a non-profit industrial complex. And it's important that we understand it as a non-profit industrial complex, because it has become an industrial complex of NPO or NGO civil society works that does not work for the people. It works for the people who fund and for the people who benefit from it. Mimi Kim, another scholar activist, has documented how the self-help activities that initially characterized the anti-violence movement of the early 1970s were co-opted as activists became more engaged in the work of systems advocacy and building coalitions with state actors authorized to control quote-unquote crime. As the work evolved and took on more of a conservative tone, issues of racial justice, sexual exploitation, pernicious state violence, and the analysis of linked forms of oppression became incompatible with the emerging conceptualization of gender violence that relied exclusively on gender essentialism. And then you see it not working for gender minorities as well. like the trans and non-binary community. Within this framework, the legitimate victim of gender and sexual violence could not be a sex worker, a queer person, a woman of color, and certainly could not be an incarcerated person, because incarcerated people are seen as having given up their rights by virtue of their crime. They should not be able to vote because they have removed themselves from society by virtue of their crime. But do you think that Cyntoia Brown chose to take herself out of the workings of society? Did any woman of femme who has killed or maimed their abuser decided to take themselves out of the workings of society? What did the systems that be expect a person like Cyntoia Brown to do? Follow procedure, fill out forms, because the system wants us to follow these supposed official what's the word? I'm forgetting words now. They want us to follow the formal processes, the official process, because they control the official process. Sex workers exist outside of society, at the fringes of society, even though the work that sex workers do is legitimate. Queer people fall outside of who is worthy of protection, because it is seen as chosen behavior and choosing to be outside of what is considered normal. Women of color have never existed. Women and femmes of color have never existed as part of any form of societal norm. And incarcerated people, I mean, it's just the way society views people who are not considered quote unquote normal is vile. This conceptualization was predicated on false assumptions of solidarity and a uniformity of experiences of violence, because they do not take intersectionality into account. There is no uniformity in experiences of violence. More importantly, it disavowed concerns about injustice as the root of problems, leading instead to an overly simplistic carceral analysis that promoted policing and prisons as the only solution. To its credit, though, the mainstream, highly visible work against gender violence firmly established that intimate relationships are sites of serious harm for women and femmes. Those with access to the developing system were provided some relief from the tyranny of abuse. Over 25% of all cisgender heterosexual women report having been hurt by someone they are or have been with in a relationship, which could include a husband, a non-cohabiting sexual partner, or a former significant other. Mainstream researchers and organizers gathered and made available this kind of data, and while this is an important and transformative accomplishment, the data was asymmetrical and incomplete. For example, the larger questions about gender socialization and heteropatriarchy, the systems and communities that legitimate gender and sexual violence, and alternative responses that do not rely on the carceral state remain underexplored and therefore invisible. Anything that is underexplored is rendered invisible. The collection and dissemination of statistical data described the problem in quantitative terms, which resonated with mainstream audiences and policymakers, but does not reveal the full extent of the harm nor the root cause of gender violence. Chronic abuse from an intimate partner is profoundly worsened by the consequences: emotional degradation, social isolation, economic dependency, and a sense of shame and alienation from one's body and spirit that typically come with physical and sexual abuse. For people who are undocumented, disabled, using illegal substances, financially insecure, queer, older, or impacted by the criminal legal system, the vulnerability to gender violence may be even more profound. People of color, those without secure housing, women who are responsible for caregiving, and young queer people who trade sex for money, for example, are at heightened risk for adverse consequences of abuse and yet remain unaccounted for in mainstream movements. And in order to secure and keep funding from a state, these people have to be erased from these movements. Else, oh, you're fighting for people we don't like. It's a pity if your money would go bye-bye. The result is that these groups are left uniquely vulnerable to increased harm from relationships and the state. The Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, was situated within this landscape of mainstream anti-violence organizations, garnering increasing state recognition and defining gender and sexual violence narrowly. Its reception was unsurprising. Of course, the state should, quote-unquote, protect women. So few questioned the accompanying forms of carcerality that emerged and deepened. The Violence Against Women Act was the more visible facet of what Mimi Kim calls the carceral creep of the 1990s. As part of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, better known as the 1994 Crime Bill, VAWA boasted this erroneous framing of gender violence as requiring a criminal justice solution. The crime bill passed with wide bipartisan support and funneled dollars into policing and prison expansion. VAWA led to an influx of public and private funding and solidified state control over responses to gendered violence. Mari Matsuda spoke out immediately after the passage of the 1994 crime bill as one of the few public critics of VAWA, particularly concerned with the proliferation of federal death penalty offenses included in the act. Matsuda wrote in Ms. magazine in 1994, quote, "The challenge for feminists is to fight the patriarchal model that spawns racism, police brutality, corruption, and a value system of property before people," unquote. 20 years later, Mimi Kim described Matsuda as highlighting, quote, "the eerie silence from feminists seemingly willing to muffle any misgivings about collaboration with the criminal legal system under the thunder of self-congratulatory applause," unquote. Yes, many organizations congratulate themselves, pat themselves on the back and say, "We've done so good," when what they've actually done is throw everybody else but the people who fit what passes as the ideal woman under the bus. Any questions or comments so far? Yes. And for them, it is mission accomplished. Because to them, hi, babe. How are you? Thank you so much. Just a quick break to say, I do have this goal. I do have this goal every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Hello. How are you? And it's autumn for us, so my feet are freezing. My feet are so cold. I hope your feet are warm, AC. Mine are freezing. And you know how cold the room is where I've got my setup. I'm jealous. Well, I do sleep next to somebody who has his own climate, but he also set a mosquito on me the other day, and I'm not letting him forget that. Hello, my love. He literally told the mosquito, go after them. I don't like things on my feet, Simon. I like having free toes. My toes must be free. I don't like having shoes on. If I could walk around everywhere without shoes, I would. Free them grippers. Yeah. I decided to do mountain climbing once. My shoulders are strong enough for it. But yeah, rude. I can't sleep with my feet under the covers. Yeah, same, AC. But anyway, while we're here talking about feet, yeah, anybody who is not considered the ideal woman is thrown under the bus. We have a case of whiteness and the ideals of suffragette feminism permeating throughout our society, where white women are considered the only women worth protecting. But that protection is still under white supremacy and patriarchy. So, is it liberation at all? I say no, because it is still working under a white supremacist, capitalist, and patriarchal system that work in tandem with each other to hold each other up and ensure each other's survival. Despite the outcry of women of color, lesbian, survivor activists, and community organizers, the federalization of the response through the passage of VAWA created impermeable bureaucratic structures at local, state, and national levels, and a push for the professionalization that completely co-opted once radical movements for safety and justice. As Kim describes it, quote, early social movement successes against an initially unresponsive criminal justice system evolved into a collaborative relationship that altered the autonomy and constitution of the initial social movement organizations, unquote. Nice. Send me pictures. Consider the simultaneity of the acceleration of other policies and systems that purported to address gender and sexual violence, like mandatory reporting requirements and the creation of the sex offender registry, rescue-oriented programs for sex workers, statutory rape legislation, and domestic violence and other courts. By deploying rhetorical ruses about the generalized vulnerability of particular women and children, particular in brackets here because, these are situations where only particular women are vulnerable according to the state. And if you fall outside that particularity, you're not a woman and therefore not worth protecting. The omnipresent risk to individuals rather than structural violence and the capacity of the state to deliver benevolent or paternalistic safety, the mainstream anti-violence movements uncritically accepted carcerality as the solution to what women of color activists had long argued was a social justice problem for which the state was partially culpable. Yes. When you deploy slave catchers as your enforcers of laws, we have a problem. If state violence and gender violence are inseparable, the corresponding explosion of carceral quote-unquote solutions augmented harm and created more dangerous circumstances for survivors of violence. And that is why majority of women women and femmes who do not report any sexual or domestic or gendered violence to the police say that they don't because they are terrified of being re-traumatized by the police themselves. Because the police, as an institution, promote gendered violence. I know too many people, having worked in gender-based violence organizations pretty much my whole life. I know too many people who went to the police to report sexual crime, who were raped by the police. They were reporting too. It is here where conservative responses to gender violence become absorbed into a popular rhetoric of carcerality and the concomitant buildup of a prison nation that we most clearly see the trajectory of a movement veering toward what has come to be called carceral feminism, in direct political opposition to abolition feminism. And carceral feminism is rooted in whiteness too. It is the white supremacist delusion that you put people out of sight, you disappear people into the system, and we will be fine. But only those people, because those are the people who are responsible, can never be one of us. How can it be one of us? Carceral feminism refers to an over-reliance on carceral approaches to solve the problem of gendered violence, despite research that clearly establishes that the carceral regime harms Black and other people of color and other marginalized groups. Asserting that the criminal legal system has the potential and obligation to protect victims of violence, carceral feminism authorizes the state to use law and enforcement to legitimately exercise power. The state judges and controls behaviors deemed bad, defining as bad those who engage in criminal acts. This framework assumes that gender oppression is a common experience, but primarily a problem of individual cisgender men using violence against cisgender women, and that the state should intervene by increasing policing, making legislative changes, creating new laws and arrest policies, prosecuting more people, expanding imprisonment, and implementing other carceral strategies. The result is neither safety nor justice, but the greater criminalization of further marginalized groups. We emphasize the simultaneity of the evolution of radical abolitionist consciousness and the mainstream trends in gender violence work. As critiques of incarceration moved into mainstream, so did critiques of mainstream responses to gender violence. A wider public has become familiar with mass incarceration and sexual assault, physical and verbal, because of many decades of persistent and unrecognized organizing in both areas. Gender violence becomes recognized as the most pandemic form of violence in the world, but is also understood in decontextualized individualistic terms. As attention is most focused on individual perpetrators, as if they themselves are the beginning and the end of these violences, the structural and institutional underpinnings of sexual assault and other forms of gendered violence are neglected. This is an unfortunate example of the failure to learn from struggles against racism, remaining at the level of the individual only, and will compel endless repetition of legal and other proceedings in efforts implicitly predicated on the impossibility of purging our society of these harms. In this way, the perpetual reliance on structures of policing is guaranteed. And that is the section. Any questions? Or any comments? Thank you, Kiara. if we continue to treat gender-based violence as an individual issue instead of a structural one, we will always fail. We will always fail in addressing it and eradicating it. We will keep the policing and the carceral system alive. And I think that is what they want. They don't want to actually solve the problem. And of course, in the US, they don't want to solve the problem because the people at the top, the people protecting those not just pedophiles, but fucking cannibals, don't want to change. Exactly, Chris. They want the illusion of change. Now, what I actually want to do, and I don't know if I should do it. A background that says Pam Bondi is what happens when white women are given tokenized power. Am I wrong? Am I wrong though? Okay, I'm going to say goodnight to Twitch and YouTube. I shall see you back on Tuesday for the reading of The Architecture of Modern Empire. I shall see you then.